Welcome back to the Path of Longevity show, and I'm your host, Dr. Robert Lufkin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Steven Sidoroff.
Before we begin, I want to take a moment to tell you about some new free online masterclasses that Steve and I are offering. For example, we know that inflammation drives all chronic diseases and aging. That's why it's called inflammaging. But we're now learning that this inflammaging can be reversed. And one of our masterclasses will spell out the top 4 ways to reverse it. If you're interested, see the link in the show notes. And now, back to this week's episode.
Welcome to the Sugar-Free Kids Summit, where we bring you the world's top educators, MDs, PhDs, childhood development experts, and pediatric nutritionists to give you the leading science and new information in regards to sugar's devastating effects on our children. Now remember, we'll be bringing you 6 to 8 hours of video presentations every single day, so make sure you set a reminder for yourself, or just look out for the email from us each morning. Hey everybody, Mike back to talk about sugar and kids. Clarification, gang. People are writing us and saying that might be unrealistic to go to 0 sugar for kids. We're not talking about 0, gang. We're talking about just sugar reduction. And if you side 0 is something you want to go to, please. Just any amount of reduction is great for us. But today I want to we're going to be talking to Dr. Robert Lufkin. Let me give you a little info on Dr. Lufkin. He's a medical school professor who has been at both UCLA and USC schools of medicine here in Los Angeles. And he's been a practicing physician and author of over 200 peer-reviewed papers and 14 books that are available in 6 languages. 6 languages. He gives lectures and keynotes all over the world. We were just talking about that. Was one of the most 100 creative people in Los Angeles by Buzz Magazine, which I loved. His latest book, which I cannot wait for, and make sure we get together because we want to promote it, Lies I Taught in Medical School, is getting ready to launch pretty soon. He's the president of the Society of Magnetic Resonance Imaging, president of the American Society of Head and Neck Radiology, and another bunch of affiliations. He studied science at Brown and has got his degree in medicine from the University of Virginia School of Medicine. Rob, how are you, sir? I really appreciate you doing this. You've become a friend of the summits here, and excited to talk to you about the kids this time.
Hey, Mike, it's great to be back with you on the program. This is such great work you're doing, and especially now looking at the kids. This is so important.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Like I was telling you earlier, this is the first time the speakers have thanked me. It's like they discovered a new avatar and a new person who's the excited guest. If they were in the sugar reduction or health business and then they had kids, they become these raging, so fanatical. And I just love it. Their passion is like jumping right out of the screen at you. It's amazing. So let's dive in here.
It breaks my heart. I go to my 11-year-old school, and they have a breakfast once a week that parents can go to. And what do they serve? They're served hot chocolate full of sugar, orange juice, which we used to think was a healthy drink, full of sugar, and sugar cereals. It's like, what a world we live in.
It's so hard, man. I'm like, who even has a chance, especially some folks that live in a desert, a food desert or what have you. Absolutely. But let's dive right in with the kids. Well, some of the statistics are blowing my mind, and we were talking earlier that in essence, this is the same thing as the adults. This is the problem. Unfortunately, now a lot of obesity in children, a lot of type 2 diabetes in children. We even have an epidemic of fatty liver in children. So tell me what you're seeing out there and what your concerns and thoughts are.
Yeah, Mike, all 3 of those diseases are diseases that back when I was in medical school and when I started practicing, they were diseases that you mainly saw in adults. The type 2 diabetes that you mentioned used to be called adult onset diabetes to distinguish it from juvenile onset diabetes, was that the diabetes that kids got. And today, the adult onset diabetes, which represents over 90% of most of the world's diabetes, is now, as you say, seen in children. And we're seeing dramatic obesity in children. And we're also seeing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which was completely unknown before 1980. And it's now the #1 cause of liver transplants worldwide. And we're seeing that in children as well. And as we'll probably talk about, it's the same drivers that drive obesity, that drive fatty liver disease, and drive type 2 diabetes. So we're really looking at the same culprits here with these.
Yeah, it's frustrating a little bit that the reason we're doing this event is that it doesn't, even though people like know about it, like a little bit, there's always Time magazine and all over the grocery store, and they talk about it. People aren't taking it seriously, especially with their kids, which kind of makes me crazy. Any thoughts on how we can get the folks to take this? Usually when I do these interviews, I try and scare the folks a little bit for the first 5 or 10 minutes, irritate the problem a little bit, then we go on to the solution. But any idea how we can raise the, like, how people that take this seriously, take this very seriously?
I think one issue we face is that sort of common sense wisdom is that if something's available in a store that is sold to children, it must be safe for children. We know that cigarettes are not sold to children, so children don't smoke cigarettes. Children don't drink alcohol. They're not allowed to. But you walk down the aisle and our supermarkets are lined with brightly colored boxes that are designed to attract children, full of sugary foods. And most people assume that they're safe for children to eat, when really they're actually not. They're very unhealthy and do lead to these diseases, the 3 that you mentioned, and many others that will affect them starting in childhood, but eventually will shorten their lives as adults.
So we've broke down somehow, it's just an evolutionary thing over about 40 interviews here. We've broken down 2 places for the kids. One, before women get pregnant until 5 years old, like preparing the body or the healthy body, and then till about 5 years old, when kids don't have cars, they're not driving, go and get their food. We don't see any reason, and most of the educators and speakers have said the same thing. They don't see any reason. But then it gets to the, like, kids that have already been exposed and trying to get them off. Can you speak a little bit to the health of the body, health of a woman that wants to get pregnant, and then those first, we call it, there's actually a nonprofit called 0 to 3, I think. But that first 1,000 days, of life and conception to 2 or 3. And it just seems so important. I feel in my heart after doing it with my kids, no sugar in that time period. I just think it's important. So can you tell the folks a little bit about what you know? Yeah.
It's very important in that time period that the mom consume healthy foods. There's actually a form of diabetes that occurs in pregnancy called gestational diabetes that many women get depending on the diet that they eat at that time. And then the children that are exposed to plants in utero while they're still in the woman, and even as soon as they're born, we're seeing a lot of breastfeeding formulations that are very high in sugar and don't reflect what's in natural breast milk for people to eat. Now, understandably, some women cannot breastfeed for various reasons, and they have to get these formulations, but it's concerning that so many of them are basically unhealthy in their nature because of their sugar and refined carbohydrate content.
Can you do me a favor? Tell me about gestational diabetes. Is it just the same, or is it caused by diet, or is it something because of the pregnancy? What's the story with that? I'm not clear on that one. And I'm sure a lot of people aren't, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure you've talked with your audience about insulin resistance, and it's the body's become less responsive to the insulin that we get. And many experts call another name for type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. We just don't respond to the insulin. We need higher and higher levels of insulin to get the sugar down. insulin resistance is not just a disease like type 2 diabetes. It actually developed in the animal kingdom as a survival tool for certain situations. And there are two situations where it's actually an advantage to become resistant to insulin, and because with insulin resistance, you tend to put on weight, and that's why obesity is linked to type 2 diabetes. That's why children and adults with type 2 diabetes tend to be obese. So insulin resistance actually occurs two normal times in nature. One, when animals go into hibernation, before winter, they become naturally insulin resistant a bit, and they consume a lot of fruits and fructose. This creates insulin resistance, and they begin to put on fat before they go into a cave to hibernate or slow down over the winter. That helps them survive. With evolution, the animals that became insulin resistant in the fall were the ones that survived because they put on fat, and the ones who didn't pass on the genes. The other time that an organism, a vertebrate or a mammal, needs to increase their weight and increase their storage of calories is during pregnancy. During pregnancy is another time that insulin resistance occurs. And again, it's a natural, healthy response to a natural condition. Gestational diabetes is when it gets a little bit out of control and the insulin levels get too high, basically. But it usually resolves after the pregnancy. That's why it's just gestationally related, which means pregnancy, as opposed to general insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, which continues on and on.
I don't dare ask this question almost, but don't you think that women, like there's this kind of thing, I'm going to have a hot fudge sundae with pickles on it kind of thing. Women like are given this free pass, or there's this common kind of folklore of a free pass of crazy eating, which usually includes a lot of sugar or carbohydrate, ultra processed carbohydrates. Doesn't that kind of contribute a little bit?
Yeah, it can. You've got a lot of hormones. You've got a lot of things going on in a woman's body when they're pregnant, just crazy, wild metabolic shifts. And it's easy that they can get off the rails a little bit and have problems with glucose metabolism. Absolutely. And the array of foods that they eat may be contributing to that as well.
Yeah. I think of it like in our work, it's all about the emotional management that sugar has been providing you over the years. And it just seems like pregnancy would be a nervous time of life, whether finance, relationship, whatever, first baby, whatever. And they might ingest a little too much sugar and cause some crazy problems. But so you mentioned fructose, and anybody that's listened to me anytime knows that I'm just totally fascinated with this new research and everything that's going on with fructose. And it's this recently, Drs. Johnson and Perlmutter and Resden came out with a paper about it being Alzheimer's. And just for me, and Dr. Palmer before that, but it's like this, I've asked this straight to Dr. Lustin and a couple other people, is it a psychoactive drug? And is it like affecting the brain chemical reward system? And I always tell people, you want to get off sugar, study fructose, right? But tell the folks a little bit about this new research on fructose, this new evolution. And for the folks that don't know, the table sugar molecule is half glucose and half fructose. And 90%, 95% of the time, anybody talking about sugar or sugar reduction talks about glucose and diabetes and fatty liver and all this other stuff and weight gain. But now it's, for me, in the addictive kind of background and stuff, it's starting to shift to fructose, especially with Dr. Johnson's research and other folks' research. So tell the folks where you stand, what you've discovered about all that.
Yeah, first of all, my kudos to Richard Johnson and Rob Lustig and Dave Perlmutter for really bringing this to the highlight, and they can explain it much better than I can. But like you, I'm struck with the fact that for so many years, the sugar molecule, as you mentioned, is made up of half glucose and half fructose. And glucose was always the bad one because that's the sugar that raises insulin. That's the problem with diabetics. That's all these things. And fructose, on the other hand, doesn't affect insulin. So at one point, fructose was even recommended to diabetics as the safe kind of sugar because you could take it and it doesn't affect your insulin. And it's actually very sweet. It's much sweeter than glucose. And that's why it comes in fruits in the fall to attract animals to bulk up for hibernation and all that. But now, as these experts you mentioned are bringing to our attention, fructose actually has a dark side to it. Unlike glucose, which is metabolized throughout our body, fructose is, other than about 10%, which is metabolized in the gut. And that's normally the protective amount. And above and beyond a small amount that's processed on the gut, anything above that gets shunted to our detoxification organ, which handles poisons in our body, and that's the liver. And the rest of it goes to the liver because the liver is what protects us from poison. And fructose behaves in a lot of ways like a poison. And as Rob Lustig points out beautifully in his work, fructose is very similar to ethanol in that it's processed by the liver. And it's also similar to ethanol in that it's addictive. It has effects on the brain, just like ethanol has an effect on the brain. Rob Lustig is famous for saying it's like alcohol without the buzz. It still has the addictive properties, but it doesn't cloud your thinking necessarily to the same way. But the problems with fructose in the liver, just like alcohol in the liver, it damages the liver, it causes insulin resistance, it causes damage that results in what's called fatty replacement of the liver. And it's fascinating. I love to tell the story. When I was in medical school, if someone walked in with fatty liver disease, it was due to alcohol, no question. It was a small amount due to viral infections, but by far the large amount was alcohol. And that was true up until 1980. Beginning in 1980, something changed and people began getting alcoholic liver disease. And actually the rate began getting fatty liver disease, and the rate went up much higher than we'd seen before with just alcohol. And the problem is the patients would come into the doctor's office and they go, "You've got fatty liver." And the patient goes, "Okay, what causes it?" And the doctor would say, "Oh, it's your drinking." And the patient would go, "I don't drink. I've never had a drink of alcohol before." And the patient would go, "Of course, sure. You need to tell us about your drinking." And that went on for a while until finally children started coming in with fatty liver disease, as you mentioned earlier. Yep. And they began realizing that it wasn't ethanol or alcohol that was doing it anymore. There was a new poison, a new toxin that had entered the food supply in large amounts. And something happened in 1980, and that poison is fructose. And what happened in 1980, the food manufacturers discovered high fructose corn syrup, or it was formulated. And this was substituted for sugar in Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and basically all the junk foods began using high fructose corn syrup because it was cheaper than sugar, because it was subsidized by the US government. Corn is subsidized, so the price is artificially lowered so people can afford it. And also unlike cane sugar, which hardens and doesn't have a great shelf life, the high fructose corn syrup lasts forever. So you can put it in junk food and Hostess Twinkies, and they'll have a shelf life of 20 years. This, starting in 1980, you can see there was a new type of alcoholic liver disease that had never been diagnosed before. And today it's far surpassed alcoholic liver disease, and it's called non-alcoholic liver disease. And interestingly, there's still discussion about what's actually causing it, despite the fact that it's really self-evident that fructose is the cause. And Dr. Lustig up at UCSF has done controlled trials where he takes children and substitutes the fructose in their diet with glucose. So it's an isocaloric substitution. In other words, he doesn't change the amount of food or even the amount of sugar that these kids eat. These kids with fatty liver disease, he just gets rid of the fructose. And within a matter of weeks, he's able to reverse the fatty liver disease in their liver, as shown by medical imaging. It's very dramatic. Yet to this day, it's still not accepted that the way to get rid of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is to cut out fructose. It's unbelievable that there's still such resistance in the medical establishment about this.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. So by extension, I need an MD or 10 or 20 or 30 to help me with this next conundrum, and for the kids as well, obviously. So fruit. So the molecule is the same in the fruit, and it's been hybridized for 300 years to be these fructose bombs, especially seedless stuff, seedless grapes and seedless oranges and whatever. Like, so like when people are in my world, trying to get off the sugar, in the early days, we have to have them lower their fruit intake or eliminate it because it keeps the cravings alive. Meaning mentally, if you eat a lot of fruit, trying to substitute it for the sugar, the table sugar or whatever, you just are still craving the table sugar. It's like there's no difference. It's the mental component or the activation of dopamine, serotonin, or all these things by the fructose in the fruit seems to keep those cravings alive. I don't know if I want to tell you to be gentle, but firm, but at least inform the folks about this phenomena, this kind of, that the fruit might keep the cravings alive, or that might, even a lot of it may hurt the liver as well. Or is that your opinion?
Yeah, that's absolutely my opinion. We all know to avoid junk food with sugar and processed things, but the challenge, as you point out, is fruit. Fruit's healthy. It's natural. We've been eating it for hundreds of thousands of years. So what could be wrong with that? And as you point out, the problem is the fruit that's available today on the shelves is not the same fruit that our ancestors ate, little apples that look like this that were sour. And these are Frankenstein type plants that are bred for extremely high amounts of sugar in it. So you're absolutely right. Eating grapes or raisins is like eating a candy bar. And you really, in my opinion, need to watch out for fruit intake as well. And one more thing you can do, worse, if you want to take fruit and make it even less healthy, is put it in a blender.
Yes.
There's a great,
or a juicer.
A juicer, exactly. Yeah, you get rid of the healthy, non-soluble fiber that slows the absorption of the harmful sugar, and you throw it out. There's a great study I love to show people about apples. If you eat a whole apple, your insulin spikes a little bit slowly. If you take that apple and crush it and make what's called apple sauce, you eat the same amount of apple in sauce, your insulin spikes up more like that. Then you take that sauce and you convert it into juice, which is apple juice, and you take that and basically your insulin goes through the roof. So you're making the fruit worse and worse by getting rid of the insoluble fiber in it.
So I don't know if you want to go down this rabbit hole a little bit, but as I mentioned, I just came back from KetoCon and half of the folks were carnivores there talking in that way. But let's talk about fiber a little bit, just real quick before we go on. And so its necessities and stuff. I know Dr. Lustig's pretty into it. Tell me your thoughts on fiber in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. No, if that's enough, that's all I need to say. I'm curious. I always say if I get my questions answered, then the summits go fine. So.
I have to admit, on fiber, I'm still learning. And my views, originally we were taught fiber's healthy and we need fiber and blah, blah, blah. And then we come across these interesting populations like the Inuit or carnivore people on carnivore diets who suddenly no longer have type 2 diabetes. They seem to be otherwise healthy and they're not eating much fiber. My point and my area now, I think fiber, we don't need the fiber, but I think it's valuable in our gut, which I think is accepted there. Obviously, we don't absorb the fiber, but the fiber is healthy to our gut microbiome. And that's an area that's still evolving. And my understanding of it is still evolving too, that just beginning to understand the important role the gut microbiome plays in our brains and our immune system and all the diseases that we've been talking about already, the flora and fauna of our gut change and do that. So I think My position on fiber, I think it's healthy for the gut, and I'm still learning more about it. I'm open-minded. I'm reading as much as I can about it.
Cool. No, I appreciate your honesty. That's great. I'm in the same place, to be honest with you, almost identical. So that's cool. There's one part I wanted to talk about real quick was before we moved on, but I think it's leaving. Oh, I heard this new term over the weekend called glycobiome. Did I pronounce that right? Is that such a thing?
The name sounds familiar. Is it like glycans?
100%.
With Gordon Lautz from the University of Zagreb is a sort of the world expert on glycans, and he has a glycanage, which is a biological clock. Look at glycosylation of proteins. So maybe that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, no, it's just really curious. I'm just keep digging. But my thing for the kiddies is like prevention of sorts, and we've broken it down. And I think you're very clear that, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no real need for kids below 5 to have this if their parents are governing everything. But after they have the sugar, after they've been exposed to it, making changes socially is very difficult. And the kids revolt and what have you. Any tips or tricks on maybe that you would think of that help parents out a little?
Well, I just want to underscore one thing you said and to highlight it, that many people are still not aware of, even my colleagues in the medical profession, is that there is absolutely zero requirement for sugar, and there's zero requirement for carbohydrates. So eating a quote balanced diet, my mom was a dietitian, so I was taught this a lot, but eating a balanced diet is really unnecessary and can be unhealthful if that balance means eating a lot of sugar and refined carbohydrates. So we can do fine eating only fat and protein, and we generate all the sugar we need from our gluconeogenesis in the liver. You can do fine without eating any sugar at all. Now, as far as the kids, the challenge, getting them off it, peer pressure is so strong at that age. It's just, I've got 2 little girls, and I'm pulling a blank on these. I'm struggling with it myself. Some things we try to do is not keep it around the house as much, because I know if we keep it around the house, heck, I'll eat it. I'll eat the sugar. If worse comes to worse. So like any addict, I'll seek it out. If it's available, I'll eat it. So I don't keep it around the house. That helps. But above and beyond that, I'm hoping greater minds than mine will come up with ideas for it.
What about like when in the schools, the girls, like the rewards for the soccer game and the academic stuff? You and your wife have any protocols for that? Bring your own snacks or keeping that reduced?
We've tried that. When we bring rewards, all the time we pick foods that aren't really high in sugar. Sure. And in different schools we've been to, we know some schools actually enforce the no sugar rule. The teachers have learned they don't want sugar and all that. Unfortunately, the school we're currently in doesn't enforce that. So it's particularly challenging to do that. One thing I wanted to mention or bring up, if I could, before we get completely out of time, is one thing I always think about with sugar and children, and also sugar and adults, is the effect Chris Palmer, who you've had on your program, talks about the effects of carbohydrates and sugar on mental illness, full-blown schizophrenia, and how he can reverse it with his great book, Brain Energy. Yeah, the scary thing is, if it's doing all this damage to causing true psychopathology, schizophrenia, manic depression, treatment-resistant depression, then it's unconceivable that it's not also affecting us on a subclinical level. And you have to wonder, and there's a number of studies. A famous one I'm thinking about was kids drinking soda pop and the relationship to violence. And it's a correlational study, so all the problems with epidemiology, but they controlled for age, they controlled for race, they controlled for gender, they controlled for socioeconomics, and they controlled for as many things as they could. But they found that consuming these high sugar beverages were associated with more violent behavior, more altercations, and everything. And you just can't help but wonder how sugar is affecting all of us and our children maybe not in full-blown pathology, but in just little ways, the way we interact with each other at dinner or our politicians interact across the aisle, and the breakdown of civil discourse and the breakdown of civil communication that we're seeing in the last 10 and 20 years. Yeah. You wonder how much this is being driven by sugar, and our children are right in the midst of it here.
Oh man, I couldn't agree more. And I think, at least in my work and a lot of the people I've spoken to, and Dr. Palmer, of course, but my thing is the addiction background stuff. And really, I've asked Gary Fettke, Dr. Lustig, point blank, is it a psychoactive drug? Both said yes. And at this point, I would beg or implore the parents, why take the risk, basically? Why? Fructose, correct me if I'm wrong, has no other function in the human body except maybe to irritate the gut so to pass the seeds around. And there's no metabolic function it requires, nothing. It just is an irritant.
It does produce energy there, so you can use fructose to produce energy, but for the most part, calories. Yeah, it's
like alcohol produces energy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what I'm getting at here is this, stumbled on it. So I'm going to, you open the door, so I'm going to jump in there. It's like mental health, the irritability of the kids. I just had a woman on, she's really good. She wrote this cool book, Hannah's Eating Junk, right? It's really, it's like, whatever. But she had a menu of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then an observation of what was going on, which all of this is simply observational. Like, people believe, or maybe don't believe, they don't have any conscious awareness that when the kids are having a tantrum or they're whatever, they're being irritable, that there is a correlation between the amount of sugar that they ate, and that this is observable in the kids, whether you got a CGM on them or whatever. You don't have to prick their fingers. You can see it very clearly if we raise their consciousness to it. And this is the thing that I'm trying to get the parents to understand, that if they could just observe the kids when they've had a big ingestion, when they're crashing out, when they're irritable, what preceded it, right? So I was wondering if maybe you had any thoughts on that. And again, it leads to the sugar affecting behavior. And another part of it is the memory. You talked about the violence, but there's a lot of studies about grades and performance and mental clarity and all these things. And this is the part I think is kind of left out of the whole discussion. And I'm wondering if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Mike, you make about how we observe the behavior. It's in our consciousness that people acknowledge that children get a sugar high when they run around, but it's humorous or comical rather than thinking it as damaging to their health. And we know when kids don't eat for a while, they get hungry or hangry, with an H. And even the keto flu, when people give up carbohydrates in their diet and they go into ketosis all the time as a healthy metabolic state, they go through this keto flu, which now many people believe is actually withdrawal symptoms from the withdrawals. Yeah. So yeah, the signs are out there. We just need to equate them with what they really mean. So that's a great point you made.
I just want to get this message out because they just think the tantrum's a bad kid or just being defiant. They have this defiant disorder or whatever. I'm like, maybe get them off the sugar. And how about ADHD? What are your thoughts there? I don't have any MD to follow. I don't have to protect an MD or PhD, and you don't have to go as far. But I believe that ADHD at a large level, and I've seen a lot of it cure, or kind of, I don't want to say it's in remission or whatever, but it's sugar. Kids are eating way too much sugar, and it's just kind of hitting their brain. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no question, the incidence or the numbers of cases have increased recently. Now, whether that's due to relaxing diagnostic criteria, there's all sorts of different arguments about that, but something is driving that. And sugar is one thing that could be could be the cause. We can't exclude it.
Yeah. Rob, this has been amazing. And I know you and I can talk about this stuff for hours. I watch your Twitter, and we could have the same Twitter feeds. It's pretty amazing, actually. Pretty wild. Any parting words for the parents to help them out a little bit, or any ideas or thoughts?
Thanks, as I said, for the work you're doing in this. And the more you can educate parents about the potential harm that sugar's actually doing to the children that they love and that they're only hoping the best for, it's a great thing. And we have a long way to go to raise this awareness, but you're certainly on the right track. And I want to thank you for doing it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Tell them where they can find you online. Like, you have a summit going on, but I think it may be over by the time this airs. But tell them where they can find you online and all that.
Yeah, my website is RobertLufkin, Lufkin MD.com, and my social media links are on there.
If you guys are on Twitter, he's got a great Twitter account. It's good. Like, really educational. You just watch it, you'll be. I think that's how we met, if I remember correctly. Anyway, yeah. Thanks again. I just super appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Mike. It's been a blast.
Take care. I hope you enjoyed today's feature presentation. If you found it valuable and would like to access lifetime access to the recording, I recommend grabbing yourself an all-access pass today. With an all-access pass, you'll receive instant access to this featured talk, plus all the video and audio recordings of the 40-plus presentations.
This is for general information and educational purposes only, and it's not intended to constitute or substitute for medical advice or counseling, the practice of medicine, or the provision of healthcare, diagnosis, or treatment, or the creation of a physician-patient or clinical relationship. The use of this information is at their own user's risk. If you find this to be on the value, please hit that like button to subscribe to support the work that we do on this channel. And we take your suggestions and advice very seriously, so please let us know what you'd like to see on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time.